Welcome to Shattered Reality with your hosts Kate Valentine and Fahrusha. Prepare to have your paradigms shifted and your truths questioned. And now, Shattered Reality.
Why, thanks for tuning in. This is Kate Valentine.
And this is Fahrusha.
And we are most honored today to have as our guest Miss Ellen Hodgson-Brown. She has written several books, 11 actually. The one we'll be discussing today is the one I certainly find incredibly important. It's The Web of Debt. And it's also, the title continues, The Shocking Truth About Our Money System, the Sleight of Hand That Has Trapped Us in Debt, and How We Can Break Free. I will say, Ellen, you not only describe the problems in the system, you're one of the few authors that describe how to get out of it. And I thank you so much for having written this book.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I always try to give solutions because you can get pretty depressed thinking about our economy unless you start thinking about, well, how do we get out of this? I mean, you have to think outside the box because inside the box we're sort of in deep trouble.
We're stuck in there. And I'll tell you, the subtitle of this show is to get your paradigm shifted. And nothing is as shifting a paradigm as your books. I just want to say one thing before we start, that it's vital, absolutely vital for anybody listening to this show to do yourself, do your family a favor, go out, get this book, Web of Debt, read it, understand it, and then do something about it. So, Ellen, anyway, the way you describe this, and I find it very good, is you use Frank Baum's analogy of the Wizard of Oz, and you sort of follow that through. How could you just tell our listeners how you happened to pick the Wizard of Oz?
Well, the Wizard of Oz is actually written as a monetary allegory in the 1890s. And in fact, that was what when I discovered that was what prompted me to write this book. I mean, I was always quite interested in the subject, and I had done a lot of research on it, but I didn't really know what I could say that would be unique and, make it more interesting than your average dry economics textbook until I discovered that about the Wizard of Oz. So in the 1890s, there was a depression that was quite like the depression of the 1930s, almost as bad. And before that, at that time, they didn't have Social Security. I mean, people were just, if you were out of work, you were sleeping in barns or, just out in the street. So conditions were quite bad. And there was a movement to restore the greenback system of Abraham Lincoln. So the original money system of the American colonies was to just issue their own money. They just printed this paper script, which were basically receipts from the government acknowledging that goods or services had been delivered to the government, and that the recipient had received something or had given something to the collective goodwill and was due that in return. So those receipts traded in the community, and what allowed them to keep their value was that they were acceptable in the payment of taxes. And that's actually what people think our money is today. You see the pictures of the presidents and on the coins and the dollar bills, and you think that money is issued by the government. But very little of our money is actually issued by the government today. Most of it is created by private banks when they make loans. And that means that we're paying tribute to a private monopoly, basically, or oligopoly, that did not have the money in the first place. I mean, you might think, all right, it's their money, it's their gold or whatever, and we want to borrow it, so okay, we owe them some interest, fair enough. But it wasn't even their money in the first place. They actually create the money on their books, and they create it as loans. This was acknowledged a year ago by the Bank of England, where they wrote in their quarterly report, because it's, people have been debating this for years, but they said, contrary to popular belief, banks do not lend their deposits. In other words, they're not even lending their own money. They're not lending our money either, as most people think. They actually create deposits in the process of making loans.
Yeah,
So,
and I think one of the chief just to get into is the Federal Reserve System. I think if nothing else comes out of this, people have to understand that the Federal Reserve System is not federal, has nothing to do with the government, and it has no reserves whatsoever. It is just owned by several commercial banks, and it prints money for this country, and as such, more or less controls almost everything. And I think that's where people that listen to the show, the conspiracy theorists, that's where they, it's always like follow the money. And that's the yellow brick road, if you will, of conspiracy theorists. And you bring this to light. I mean, I never realized that banks actually no longer have money.
I have a question.
Okay.
Just on the sideline here. You mentioned The Wizard of Oz, and there being it being an allegory, so to speak, of what was going on in the day, and you sort of went into, at the time, the 1890s and so forth. But Frank Baum wrote about 8 books in the series The Wizard of Oz. Is there something to be found in each of them, or just the first one?
Well, I didn't actually finish that story. So the American colonists issued their own money. Then when we became a country, that they issued it until King George forbade them to do it. And then some commentators say that was the real reason for the American Revolution, that they cut us off from issuing our own money. We had to borrow from the Bank of England, and we didn't have gold. So we went to war to regain the right to print our own money. But during the war, the Continental, the currency that they did print, got devalued, and so the founding fathers were afraid to make that the official currency. So we wound up on a gold system after all. But Abraham Lincoln then and the banks wound up creating our money on a fractional reserve system where they would have a certain amount of gold, and they were allowed to issue their own banknotes, which were paper money. I mean, even today, it's Federal Reserve note means a Federal Reserve banknote or promissory note. So they would issue their own banknotes, supposedly backed by gold, meaning you could take that note and get that amount of gold from the bank, but the bank only held about 10% of the gold necessary to back all the notes that they printed. So they were lending out a lot of notes that were not backed by gold. So 9/10 of their notes were just printed paper money. So that's where the money was coming from. It was created by the banks on that system, and it still is today, even though we're not on the gold standard. And then during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln, in order to avoid borrowing heavily, as he would have had to do, and as typically happens in wars, and you could argue that it's the bankers, the big banks, that sort of precipitate wars or certainly encourage wars because they always win both ways. I mean, both parties go into debt, and so they come out the big creditors of countries after wars. So to avoid that, Abraham Lincoln issued his own had the government issue its own currency, basically going back to the system of the American colonists. So these were called U.S. notes or greenbacks, and you can still find U.S. notes today. I know my mother has one in her collection. She's 95, but anyway, she's got one in an envelope somewhere. And in the 1890s, there was a movement to go back to that system, and this was the first ever march on Washington. So that was quite a unique thing, and it was in the news that there were these group of people. They were out of work laborers and so forth, farmers, who marched all the way from Ohio to Washington, D.C. So this is a major march. It wasn't just marching around the Capitol like they do today, but they marched long distances in order to try to get Congress to go back to issuing their own money. And they would use that money for, one was the Good Roads Bill. So it was basically for infrastructure, rebuilding the roads, and this would put labor back to work. And they would use some other money to make cheap loans to the state governments. But of course it didn't pass. But it was quite unique, this march on Washington, and so that was the basis of the plot of The Wizard of Oz, where you have Dorothy and her 3 friends who are not exactly human, but anyway, this motley crew of people who think they're looking outside themselves for solutions, and it turns out that the wizard that they thought would solve their problems didn't have the answer, or he wasn't the magician that they thought he was. But the answer was within themselves. Frank Baum was not only a populist who marched by night for William Jennings Bryan, then the populist candidate, but he was a theosophist, and a basic premise of theosophy is you create your own reality. You are what you believe. So I tried to carry that theme through as well in the Web of Debt, that we can have it all. I mean, we can manifest our own reality, which holding us back is this false belief that we're in debt, that we're limited by this debt to people who are lending us something that should have been ours in the first place. I mean, it's really, we have the credit within ourselves. We have the national credit that could just be issued to create the abundance that we need and deserve and are actually capable of manifesting. And this has been done before, like in Australia in 1912. We set up the Federal Reserve in 1913. In 1912, Australia was also going through a depression, and they decided that, it was a global depression, and they decided that the private banks had failed and that they needed a public bank. And so the government set up this truly public bank, unlike ours, which just purported to be serving the government. And they used that bank to just issue the national credit without backing up by anything. They just paid workers and materials for doing things for the government. And in this way, they funded roadways, seaways, various products, and they funded their participation in World War I. But the governor of the bank, who was the clever guy who instituted this system, made the mistake of going to England after that and boasting that the Australian people didn't need to borrow from the Bank of England, that anything that they could imagine they could have just by, they could issue the money and they could produce the thing. And that was such a threat to the Bank of England that for unknown reasons, he passed away suddenly after that of a heart attack. I don't know that there was any conspiracy involved there. But after that, the Bank of England came up with this new rules, new system, which was the central banking system.
I think that's been a bad bugaboo. It's sort of the government never letting a crisis go to waste, as our present government keeps telling us. And out of the one back in the early 1900s, that gave rise to both the federal income tax, which I believe was passed. That was unconstitutional up until the time an amendment was passed. And I believe the amendment was passed on Christmas Eve with a bare quorum of the Senate president at that time, most of whom had banking affiliations. And not only that, but the Federal Reserve was also created in that year, and I think the rest, of course, is just history.
Today, Iceland has broken away, and they seem to have thrown the bankers out and started anew and doing pretty well. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, well, the European countries in general, Iceland was attempting to get into the EU, but they weren't and aren't a member of the EU.
Right.
Countries like Ireland and Greece were forced to take these big bailouts from the Troika, the European Central Bank, the IMF, and the EU, the European Commission, in order to bail. Well, first they bailed out their big banks, but they were forced to do it in order to save the big foreign investors, which would be like Goldman Sachs. It was our banks that were invested there. So Iceland got in the same sort of trouble, but it was such a huge. It would have bankrupted the people of Iceland if they had actually gone through with bailing out their big banks, and so they revolted and refused to do it. But they were not part of the EU.
No, I know that.
So they could get away with it. Yeah. But there was a big faction that wanted to be part of the EU, and so there was a major faction that would have gone along with this bailout, but the people revolted and won.
Well, would you say that was for the best, that the people revolted against the idea?
Yeah, definitely. They came out. They suffered at first, as you would anticipate. Of course, there was their currency lost value, but they've recovered much better than than Greece, for example. They're doing much better than Greece. That once you get through that initial period, I think Greece should do the same thing. But of course, Greece is a member of the EU, and there's so much pressure for them to
they have
stay.
A kind of a different circumstance, I think, than Iceland, and a different cultural meme. I don't think it's the right word, but the Icelandic are very independent, take care of themselves kind of people because they're on that little cold island, and they know that anything that is not on the island, they're going to have to, make up for themselves. Whereas Greece is on a crossroads of a great deal of illegal immigration, and Greece is in a tight spot, but they don't have the same work ethic as the people in Iceland do. So both things seem to be working against them. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. They are in a different situation, but still they've been really pushed to the wall, and it seems to me they're going to have to do something. So
yes.
Interesting times to see what happens. Some countries. Go ahead.
Ellen, if you had to guess, how many actual people do you think are behind this? Because you can't call it American or European or anything. I mean, this is truly international now. How many people do you think are behind controlling the money supplies? Actual individuals. I know at one time they said David Rockefeller, who next month will be celebrating his 100th anniversary birthday. At one time they thought David Rockefeller was at the head of it, but I remember back in that book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. At that time, they felt that 7 people controlled the money supply of the world. Do you think it's still just a handful of individuals?
Well, I know you talk about UFOs on your program.
Listen,
so
nothing is. I will tell you.
It.
No, Ellen. Nothing is paranormal as the money supply. I mean, you can talk about ghosts.
Well, and how could 7 people even do it? I would almost guess that there are bigger forces behind them, because this has gone on for centuries, really. If you track it back.
What do you think are these bigger forces?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if it was some form of non-human.
Seriously? Wow, you surprised me by that.
I think that she's not the only. Do you mind if I call you a renegade economist? She's not the only one. I've heard other economists suggest something similar, and I was kind of bowled over by it myself when they said it.
Yeah, I can give you 2. Paul Hellyer was former Defense Secretary of Canada, and he says it, and he's a money reformer who has written several books on money reform. Mm-hmm. And Catherine Austin Fitts.
That's the one. That's the one that I heard.
Secretary of HUD, and lost everything, and her life was at risk. And she said, she did not want to believe this either, but she tracked it down, and she says that's what it is.
She's the one that I heard speaking about much of the same things that you're speaking about. She's the one who said she thought that there was something unusual behind this.
They're so powerful. I mean, how could any family be that powerful? I mean, look at the military with chemtrails and HARP and all the things that we know they're capable of. They want to control the weather by 2025. I mean, that was totally published in 1999. The Air Force came out with a thing that said controlling the weather by 2025, and their alleged justification was that the tools are there. I guess there are like 150 patents or something on controlling the weather.
Yes.
Do you think? I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
If the tools are there, and therefore we, the Americans, need to be first, since somebody else doesn't use them against us.
Do you think that we have, Russia might be using it against us now in our far west? I mean, I've heard that thrown out there.
No, I think China's doing it to California because it'd be easy they're both Pacific nations, and now we have this Pacific trade agreement going on, and this enormous drought in California that's killing the state.
You think it's China? I think it's Russia, but go figure.
But maybe it's the aliens.
How did they even get that technology? I mean,
I'll tell you the truth. I think it goes back to Sitchin and the old biblical days, and the
And
Templars.
so do I, actually.
The Templars.
I'd love to. I was tempted to write about that. That would have been my next book, but I'll only say this on your show. But I'm head of the Public Banking Institute, and they discourage me from going too far over the edge. But it's so interesting. Like, who
I'll
are
say
we?
it
Where
then.
did we come from? It's obviously all connected. I mean, you can't disconnect your your DNA from.
No, you can't. And look at this. The Knights Templar go down to Jerusalem, come back with the treasure of Solomon. Now, 7 guys are not going to schlep back a whole bunch of jewels from Jerusalem. They came back with the idea of fractional reserve and compound interest. And those 2 ideas alone allowed them to initially gather up the entire money supply of Europe. Obviously, they became a terrible threat to the kings. They were killed off, but the kings by then learned how to do this, and as you said, then the Bank of England institutionalized fractional banking, and the rest becomes history. And so where did Solomon learn all this from? He was a brilliant individual, and perhaps he figured it out. I don't know, but that's my little theory. Or not.
Yeah.
But somebody somewhere has
somebody told him,
Well, there was a theory out there floated about ancient Africa, down in the southeast of Africa, where the gold mines now are in Namibia and I can't think of the name. I guess South Africa and a few of those other countries. And if you go on a helicopter ride, or if you're taking pictures from space, you can see these kind of unusual circles. And there was some kind of
it's Adam's calendar.
Theory formulated that there were some aliens. And this is a total theory. I'm not saying I subscribe to it, but I'm throwing it out there because we're talking about these things. That there were some form of aliens that had enslaved the humans, much as some of the population of Africa is enslaved now by the mine owners. And these aliens were bound to take the gold out. And they valued the gold as we value the gold, which brings up a question: what is so special about gold?
And what
that goes back to Sitchin.
What do you feel about the gold standard, Ellen? I mean, what do you have any theories about that? What is so special about gold? Because it's always been valued.
Well, going back to Sitchin, supposedly there was the gods who came down or the aliens who came down were looking for gold because it wasn't the actual physical gold, but the essence of gold. And I think it was either the thing that allowed them to have an eternal life, or I read somewhere that it was like chemtrails, that because they had destroyed the atmosphere on their planet, they needed the gold. It was to, if you put that up in the atmosphere, you could block out or somehow you could restore the environment. They had destroyed their atmosphere just as we are destroying ours now, and they needed it for their chemtrail thing. I think that was out of Sitchin. Anyway, I think it's Michael Tellinger who has written about the gold mines in Africa.
Yeah. But, all right, so it's interesting. Let's go to the gold mines and the enslavement. How the thing that I could never get straight in my head is how again, a handful, forget it, aliens, humans, whatever, can control literally billions of people. I think you make that point so well in your book. Like, everybody waits for the white knight to come over the horizon and save us all from ourselves, but unless we, again, like in the Wizard of Oz, unless we take care of it ourselves, ain't nobody coming over the horizon. And so you have to spread the knowledge, and knowledge is power. And I think that's one of the reasons that economics and so on is always considered such an obscure topic. And, don't bother your head about the Federal Reserve System. It's there for you. Don't worry about it. And I think that's how they keep us all under their thumb.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. They make it obscure. They make it boring. they use their own language so that even if you try to read about it and you're willing to put up with boredom, you still don't know what they're talking about because you don't understand the words they're using. So that's what I tried to do in the Web of Debt, was to translate a lot of that stuff. I'm actually a lawyer by training, so research is my thing. And I was a writer before I was a lawyer. When I tried to be a writer and figured out that as a young person there was no way I could support myself as a writer, so I went to law school. But anyway, so with writing Web of Debt, I really enjoyed using my writing skills, putting in the hook, making it a story, trying to make every chapter a page turner, and yeah.
So that money truly is power. I mean, that really does make the world go round. And if everybody understood it better, a lot of not only would the wealth be redistributed, as nowadays everybody's, inequality, blah, blah, blah. But I think the thing is not so much that wealth gets redistributed, but the knowledge of money gets redistributed. And then if people understood what was going on, I think that would stop a lot of the not so much inequality, because but not to get into that topic, but it would just sort of even the playing field a lot.
Right. Money is control, and I think that's how we've been captured, is through this whole money system where they make us think we're in debt when we needn't be. I mean, we as a country needn't be in debt. We could issue our own money. Everybody thinks that would be inflationary, but it wouldn't. We're at the point right now where, well, even if you just look at the numbers, after 2008, the shadow banking system, which is a M3, I won't even try to explain that, but the shadow banking system shrunk by $4 trillion. This is according to the Federal Reserve's own figures. And so you could add $4 trillion to the system, and you'd only be back to where we were in 2008. Plus, there's the fact that when you add money to the system, assuming how you add it, don't use it for derivatives and speculative things, or to bail out banks. But if you use that money, you, the government, print money and pay workers and materials, as like Lincoln did and built the railroads and all those things with. Or like the American colonists did and totally developed their colonies. Of course, there was no such thing as derivatives and speculative investments then. So if you do that, pay for real productive things, then you're putting money in people's pockets. So
Absolutely.
People will go out and spend it on the things they need, and that means more things will be made. Like if the shoe salesman sees he's got a lot more customers, he doesn't raise his prices. He puts in a lot more orders to the shoe factory, and then the shoe factory hires more people and makes more shoes. So that's the first thing they do, is increase production. And only when they can't produce anymore do prices go up. And right now, because of outsourcing, which is obviously bad for our labor, but it's good in terms of how much availability or how much ability to produce is out there. We've got outsourcing and we've got mechanization. So we're a long way from using up our productive capacity. And only when you hit full employment and run out of materials do prices go up.
Well, certainly our infrastructure could use some help. I mean, just looking at this terrible train tragedy which just occurred, and when we look overseas and we see the trains that are available in Europe and China and Japan, I had on my blog a suggestion about doing a solar kind of a partially solar train that would run very quickly, half buried, sort of in a groove in the ground. And a few people came back to me and said it was a great idea, but of course, I'm not an engineer, and none of that stuff is going to happen. But it's the ideas, having the ideas put out there, and looking to improve our country, rather than financing both sides of a Middle Eastern debacle. Now that we apparently are buying through some other channels the petroleum that ISIL is selling.
Or better yet, even having the federal government account for the $7 trillion subsidy that was, what was that, the underwriting everything. And oddly enough, that $7 trillion just sort of disappeared. Oh, well, I guess Bill and
that's
Hillary.
what got Catherine Austin Fitz in trouble. Where she
Yeah,
where
the hell did that money go
that
to?
had disappeared, and she started reporting on it.
Yeah, well, $7 trillion would get you killed, I'm sure. But it's a shame. Nobody, but I think there has to be like an. What about an outside auditor? Would that ever work? Do you think, or is that just really asking for trouble?
An auditor of the Fed?
Yeah.
Are you saying? Well, the Fed claims that they are audited. They audit themselves, and then.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and
I audit myself too.
Yeah, me too. Unfortunately, the IRS comes along and re-audits
And
me.
they disagree. How does that happen? A smaller point, but still part of the point, because everybody, is a part of the whole. And in the last 15 years or so, we have seen banks come along and illegitimately seize people's homes for loans they never took.
Oh, don't get her started on the mortgage situation.
No, but this is
Well,
something...
that was a beauty of the government. Who was it, Frank, and those guys that came up with that whole, you have to lend people money. Oh, they can't pay it back? Oh, it's okay. Give it to them anyway.
But
Then they went bankrupt.
No. But what I'm talking about, that may very well be. I'm not arguing that point. What I am saying is that individual banks, could somebody, let's say the Dime Savings Bank or the Chase Manhattan Bank, can tell.
Wow.
That's a long time ago,
Yeah,
right?
boy, you're definitely
I'm showing my age. But say the Chase Manhattan Bank can come to Kate Valentine's house and say that she has an outstanding loan which she never took. And then it's up to her to prove that she didn't have the loan. And as a result of this sort of real crooked activity, individuals who have their homes all paid off, no debts, are losing their homes.
Yeah, and then you have to pay an attorney to get it back as well. Yeah, theoretically you're innocent until proven guilty. I saw another case that's similar. I mean, it's related, but it's not about homes. But now they have this limit of you can only take out or deposit $10,000 in cash at one time.
Yeah.
So a gas station owner was depositing like $3,000 at a time, and they took his entire bank account of $100,000 because they said that was a serial deposit of cash, which added up to more than $10,000 in some period of time.
Right.
I mean, obviously, a gas station attendant takes cash, and of course, he's not dealing in drugs; he's dealing in gas. Like Arco only takes cash. But so then the government was going to give him a settlement of they would give $50,000 of it back, and he's fighting it, which is good. But I mean, why should you have to prove that
it's your money?
Prove that you were innocent. They're supposed to prove that you're guilty.
And local police departments seize assets of people that they stop, that they suspect of a crime, but have not even been convicted or even charged officially, by the court with a crime. And they come along and take your car because they have a report that you were involved in a drug deal in Chicago, so they take your car in Virginia, and you were never proven guilty of any such thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a way that they supplement their incomes because there isn't enough tax money out there. But we're definitely headed for a police state. I mean, I think all this repressive stuff that's going on it's the last thrashings of the dinosaur. They're desperately trying to protect their billions from the mobs, which will be irately coming after them. The more and more, I mean, they can't suppress the knowledge that we're all getting from the internet and from shows like yours that expose all these. What's really going on. It used to be they could control the mass media, and that's how they controlled people's thinking. But the mass media are losing market share.
So my friend David Biedny, and I'm sure he's got this quote from somebody else, like we're six meals short of a revolution. People just have to miss 6 meals, and there's going to be a revolution. What should the average person do to preserve their life, to be able to live decently? According to you, Ellen Brown.
Well, I can say what you should do, and I mean I'm one of those do what I say, not what I do. You should have a garden, but do I have a garden? No, I live in a condominium. I mean, there's no place to have a garden here. So I mean, you should grow your own food if you're capable of it. If you've got a place to do it, you should definitely keep some cash at home. They're trying to make cash illegal, basically. I mean, there's this cashless society movement where I think one reason they're doing it is they want to be able to bail in our money if the big banks go down, and our money is just numbers in their accounting system.
It'll disappear.
With the new bail-in system that the big banks are supposed to recapitalize themselves by converting our deposits into their capital. So they're actually allowed to confiscate our deposits, and we can't even sue about it. It's legal. I mean, that's the law.
They were trying to do it
in the Dodd-Frank Act.
In Cyprus,
yeah.
They're doing it.
Yeah, what they did in Cyprus is the law. That was just like the trial run. It's now the law as of last November, when they all met in when the G20 met in Brisbane, and put their stamp of approval on it. Of course, they probably don't even know what they're approving. They whiz in. It's like this TPP, which we don't even get to know what's in it. But the way they've managed to get it past the Senate is they negotiate. It's like, okay, you don't like that provision, or they want this provision in it, and then they make a deal. But then they're leaving these outrageous things in it where we are totally going to be at the mercy of big international companies.
What is that they said? We'll you'll understand the law after we pass it, and you're screwed.
All right, we'll tell you later.
Yeah, right.
Vote.
Yeah,
We'll
meet you in debtor's prison. So you think basically you have to almost go back to the days of the colonies. You make your own food, hunt your own animals. Get a gun at the front door, and join with your neighbors and make a militia. Yeah, if you can. Yeah, that's right. All the ammunition's been.
Where I live in Los Angeles, if there's a big Holocaust, I mean, I'm just going down with the ship because I don't have a way to get out of the city. I don't have any place to escape to. I mean, it's not that I'm exactly gambling. I think I just don't value my life all that much. I mean, it's so interesting being on the team that's trying to fight it off.
Yeah.
I don't really care if I'm gambling that we'll win. I think we will win.
It's not easy to grow your own food, Ellen. I'm out trying to grow my food, and I manage to get a few pears every year, an apple or two that doesn't get eaten by the birds, a few strawberries, and seven tomatoes. And then all of a sudden I wake up one morning and all my beans are eaten by some hungry groundhog or something.
You're going about it all wrong.
Yeah.
You make friends of people with excellent gardens. They get bumper crops and you get theirs. That's how you do that.
I see. Okay.
I think that goes back to banking, like you invest in their garden and they pay you back a certain percentage.
I am one hell of an herb gardener, though. I will tell you that.
But so Ellen, going back, so you really feel that if the general population doesn't wake up soon, we are going to be at the mercy of this controlling force, regardless of whether it's human or something else.
Yeah, well, I think we're already at their mercy. I mean, we've been controlled for a long time, and we are waking up, and that's why they are becoming more repressive in their manner of controlling us. But because the light cannot be stopped, I mean, I think that maybe I've read it. I don't know, but actually I had an experience in India, a 2-day cosmic consciousness sort of experience. So I really do think there's
tell us
another
about
level.
That. Yeah, well, tell us about that, please.
Well, we used to live in Africa. I was my ex-husband was worked for USAID, so we lived in several different countries. And when we lived in Africa, I started going to this ashram of the Brahma Kumaris, which is Raja Yoga, where you just look at a point and don't think, and that's the whole deal. So it's sort of like you create your own reality, but you've got to block out your left brain is always, continually talking to you. So you want to shut that thing down. In fact, I wonder about your left brain. I think that might be them talking to us. You know how you get like a song running through your head or something and you can't get rid of it? It's like they're creating static all the time, so you can't hear the voice of the higher wisdom or whatever, your own inner higher self, because it's always being drowned out by this chatter that's going on like a radio in your left brain.
I couldn't agree more.
So I went there for a while, and they were going to India, and they allowed me to go along, even though I didn't technically qualify. And so it was a 9-day trip, and we just sat and looked at a point. They got us up at 3 a.m, and we sat and looked at a point. That's what we did. When you're supposed to try not to think, just look at this point. And after a week, the founder, now deceased, talked through a medium, a nun, for hours and hours, and I got really tired, and I went back to my room after a while and fell asleep. And then when I woke up, there was this light coming out of my chest. I thought, far out. And I ran back, and then so for the next 2 days, it was sort of like Disneyland, or like it was just like the essence of the thing, not like a drug trip. Not like distorted, but like more real than real, and just the sort of. So I just, and everything was good, you feel good. And I can't even remember the details that much, but it was just like another plateau of existence. So I knew that we were capable, if you can spin your chakras up a notch.
Yeah.
The next notch up is something more marvelous than where we are now. So we're actually like butterflies. Like caterpillars waiting to become butterflies. But it seemed to me that the message was, my job was to figure out how to get prepare the ground so that we're all ready to become butterflies. I can't do it alone. It's got to be the whole, like we're all taking off together.
So where do you come down on the whole idea of an enlightened, somebody being like an ascended master, an enlightened soul? Apparently the nun who had the guru speak through her somehow activated your chakras?
Yes. I've never had that experience again, except when I would go to I would go to their Sunday ceremonies for a while, and there would be this 10-minute reading of the guru named Baba. There's a lot of Babas, but he was their Baba. And during that 10 minutes, I would flip into this state, and then it would go away. So it seemed like it was a guru-induced thing, and you hear about lots of people who go to India and get touched, in some way by the guru.
Shaktipat.
Good. Yeah. You need the person who wakes you up or guides you through or gets the energy going, maybe activates the energy. I'm not sure how it works.
I have a very short thing to say on that. I attended Jiva Mukti yoga classes in the 1990s in the East Village of Manhattan. And every once in a while, every couple of months, they would have a special session. And I ended up going to this special session with the now deceased Sun Bear. Sun Bear was a Native American holy man from the West Coast, somewhere from the Northwest. And I should really know more about him, considering the experience I had, because I went to his lecture, and he walked around, he talked to people, and he gave a lecture, and he asked us all where we were from, and he wanted to know our backgrounds for some reason. And I thought it was a very pleasant lecture, but I wasn't really, blown away in the sense that I didn't really feel anything had happened to me. And he was supposedly giving everybody a healing. Well, I got back to my apartment, and about a half an hour after I got back to my apartment, I started running around the living room. I have a nice-sized living room, not huge, but I began running around in circles, which I did for approximately 2 hours. Just ran around in a circle and I couldn't stop. I tried to stop. I'd stop for like a minute or got a glass of water or something, and I went back to running around my living room. It was the craziest thing ever. And I don't know, maybe it was some form of healing. He was supposed to be there doing a healing, and maybe I became healed from something, but I sure had no idea that this was going to happen to me. So I just throw that out there as a fun little tidbit.
Wow.
Wow. Well, I like that whole idea, though. I mean, when you say bring out the light, I mean, that really goes back to biblical times, like the darkness and the light, the yin, the yang. And so if you're saying that perhaps aliens are behind all these large human families that more or less control the banking interests, I guess they're not very nice beings. It seems like they would be the dark powers.
Not all of them, I don't think, do you?
Well, I mean, anybody who's sort of enslaving, one of the conspiracy theories is this will eventually become prison Earth, and it seems like that's where we're headed. But just really quickly, I'm just going to interrupt this quickly. We are talking to Ellen Hodgson-Brown. She is the author of The Web of Debt. It's an extraordinarily important book, one that not enough attention has been paid to because I think the powers that be have somewhat suppressed the media to advertising your book. So hopefully people who are listening get a hold of Web of Debt, read it, and act on it.
Absolutely.
And maybe that will help you bring the light. But so I have to get back to this. You think that possibly there are some alien families behind human families behind banking families? Or a possibility of. I wouldn't obviously force you to.
I don't know, but yeah. Well, I think The Matrix, the movie, I saw how it was made, or I read how it was made. It was actually the people who wrote it, two men, I think they were from Est, and they had this revelation themselves. And so they were sort of channeling this idea, but that seems about right to me that there's another dimension where we're controlled from. So it's not like alien families, like a number of people that physically landed and breeded and stuff like that. But or maybe, I don't know, who knows. But I would see it more as entities who are not necessarily embodied. But who knows? I don't know. And I've also read, though, that the reason for things like chemtrails and HARP and messing up the environment is to block us from escape, or from like imprisoning us within their meme, or their they are able to control the information we get. It's to keep the light out, in other words, and so that we can't know what's going on. But the light will prevent. I mean, the light keeps seeping through because one reason is the internet, and who brought the internet. It was
good
the
question.
internet itself is like our salvation, because it's connecting everybody, making us all one.
But I think the FTC is trying to control that now.
Yes, they are trying to control it.
They're starting to stick their grimy little paws into that too. Because you're right. I think that's going to be the fly in their ointment. I really think that is the thing that hit them from left field. They never saw that one coming, the internet. And I doubt if they can control it at this point. I agree with you.
Also, alternative power is another thing that's going to loosen the grip of the oligarchs. I think, because I think if we are off the oil standard, and whether we go with wind or solar or 0 point energy or something else that comes along, I think if we can get off oil, we can get out of some of the problems. I don't know how you feel about that, Ellen.
Oh, I agree. No, I think oil is one of the ways in which we have been controlled, because they can limit it, or it is limited, or they purport to. I mean, it may not be. There's such a thing as abiotic oil that is created. I mean, so we don't even know that it's really limited, but we are told that it's limited, and therefore they can raise the prices on it and
I think
manipulate.
That oil, I mean, this is just my opinion, but I think that, of course, oil is being produced now in the earth, but in such small quantities that I don't believe that it's a limitless resource. I don't believe in a larger picture of abiotic oil. Only in the smaller picture, like sure, plants are dying and they're getting squashed under earth, and the earth is compounding them, and somewhere oil is actually being produced. But the rate of production does not equal the rate of extraction, as far as I could see. And I really think that we got to look at something else.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Well, there's so many other
yeah.
something elses. You don't even really need oil. That's also a fiction.
Yes.
I mean, oil is necessary to create plastic, and plastic may or may not be necessary. But other than that, who needs it? You know, and I think that would really put a damper. I think that's, as you said, and this goes back to the Rothschilds, you know, money is lent out to both sides of a war.
Right.
And right now, just to kill the Middle East problem, you could just do away with oil. The money would dry up and they'd go back out to whatever they had been before. They are working on billions and trillions of dollars that are all oil dollars. And, you know, if once those go away, they really don't have an awful lot left.
No.
Nothing, actually.
Got a lot of sand. Maybe they can make solar power.
You know, it is such an American misconception. I always think of the cities there as little sand huts. I mean, they're enormous. Like Tehran is an enormous city.
Yes,
It's a beautiful city. It's a
Was a
shame that the
beautiful city.
idiots have it. But, you know, that's just my opinion. I'm sorry, I don't mean to say that. I suppose I'm in trouble. But then again, I'm a woman without a burqa, so I'm in trouble anyway. So, the hell with it.
You're what? Sorry.
A woman without a burqa. That'd be a great title for a book.
Woman without a burqa.
I don't understand what's
Burqa is that
oh, without a burqa.
Yeah.
I had a friend who went around in Iran dressed as a boy. When she was a teenager, her father was some kind of attaché, and she was more or less kept inside, even though that was more liberal times. So she went out dressed as a boy, as a 14-year-old, just so she could walk around.
Yeah. But so you speculate that there really is sort of a war going on now between people or things or whatever that want to control the whole planet, and the rest of the planet that doesn't want to be controlled. Does that sort of sum it up a little, or?
Yes.
Yeah, I think the numbers are on our side. I mean,
yeah, I do too. Well, we definitely got the numbers, and I mean, if it's the 99% versus the 1%, we've got the numbers in terms of votes. So, but what we don't have is a consolidated understanding.
Yes.
Once everybody knows how we're going to move forward, you know, if we had a united front, if we had a plan that everybody agreed on, for me, I'm arguing with the other money reformers at this stage, you know, saying, no, one says, no, we've got inflation. Another says, no, we have deflation, or, you know, we should be printing the money, we should be controlling the debt, et cetera. So we don't even agree on how we can move forward. But if we did, I think we would necessarily win, because we've got all the votes.
But it has to be public, because there's also a conspiracy theory that said that Lincoln was assassinated obviously John Wilkes Booth had a lot of other issues, but Greenback issuing had a lot to do with it. And there's also tales that Kennedy was actually creating a bill creating redback dollars. And when he was assassinated, the first thing Johnson did was run into the office and veto that bill. So whether or not that's true or an urban myth, I don't know. But it seems like unless you have somebody willing to do something like that, that has a lot of people and a lot of protection around them, they're not going to make much headway.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, that's sad but true.
And governments, whether you come down on the right or the left, live by Goebbels' theory of telling lies enough times that you believe them. And I don't think that's limited to any particular party.
No, that's a politician's specialty. But, you know, they were saying how many things came out of World War II, and that's one of them is propaganda and media control. They've certainly learned that very well, actually. Whoa. More so than nuclear power, that propaganda is a stronger weapon against the general population.
Right. I think it was Goebbels that said that.
Yeah, well, one of them. Who cares? You know, one of these old guys. They're all dead, so who cares? what we have left is a propaganda machine.
Yeah. Well, and the two-party system means that you can't get any opposing views in there. The two parties are they used to be the party of Rockefeller and the party of Morgan. I mean, there were two big bankers competing with each other. So I actually ran for state treasurer in California, so I could see how hopeless it was if you don't have the money to get onto TV, because how are you possibly going to reach millions of people unless you could win a local election like we do have. I ran as a green, so we do have.
Oh, good. I'm a green. I'm a radical green. You go, girl. You go, girl.
So we have a Green Party mayor in Richmond, California, which is a 100,000 population, 100,000. So that's a place where you actually can make a difference by getting on local TV, doing local speeches, doing bumper stickers, putting signs on your lawn, and that can influence the vote. But in a whole state the size of California, or definitely in a country the size of the U.S., you absolutely have to get onto national TV, which means you have to have the very big, basically the big banks behind you, which means you have to cater to the big banks. So we should have proportional representation like they have in Europe, where if some party gets 20% of the vote, then they get 1 out of 5 representatives.
Yeah, that would be good. That would be good.
Well, can we say in terms of this, think globally, act locally, which is the green slogan?
Yeah, well, I think that our only hope may be to act locally and get your community together and provide in your community for farming or access to food, and you can set up your own money system. And I'm head of the Public Banking Institute, so our thing is that every state should have its own bank, like the Bank of North Dakota, but also you could have city-owned banks. I live in Los Angeles, which is 14 times the size of North Dakota population-wise, so we could definitely have several city-owned banks here, which could then fund, or if you're just a large community, you could have your own bank funding your own community things. So basically it would be like a cooperative where the profits, instead of being sucked out all the time, would return to the community. So you could do long-range things where you could do infrastructure if you're big enough for infrastructure. I mean, that's one reason why we don't do infrastructure is you can't get, or we're not putting money into it, you can't get this Congress to think beyond short term. Whereas in China, they can do their 10-year plans, or they can look way far ahead, and they just print the money. That's where they get the money, and it works very well for them.
2 questions about money. One question: have you ever heard of, or know of Dominor in northern Italy, in the foothills of the Alps, where it is a commune, a spiritual, artistic, civic commune? And they have their own money, the Dominorian currency there. Are you aware of that?
No, not aware, but I know that my daughter lives in Europe, and that's what she her thing is biomimicry, where you would imitate nature, but she lectures to eco-villages about how they can set up their own money systems.
Well, Dominor has, and fairly successfully, and they've pretty much, they fight the church, and they fight the country a lot of Italy to keep their own autonomy, and they have run for local council seats and won. At first, the people in surrounding communities were against them, and they proved to the local people that they had the people's best interest in mind. And it's really quite a beautiful place to visit, and I recommend it to your daughter and to yourself. My second question.
Okay, how do you spell that?
Damanhur, Dominor. Now, there's a Dominor in Egypt. It's not in Egypt. This one is in the foothills in Val Chiasella or something like that in northern Italy, near the town of Torino. It's about 50, 60 miles into the hills from Torino, which is a lovely town as well. The second question that I had for you had to do with Bitcoin. Are we going to see anything happen with that, do you think?
Well, Bitcoin's a really interesting development. I mean, when people ask me about it, I don't necessarily recommend that people put their money into it because it's so volatile. So you could lose your money as well as make your money. Had you gotten in right at the beginning, it would obviously have been really good. But it's a very interesting model for how you could set up a currency system that could not be confiscated by the big bank, within a bail-in. In other words, it's an independent currency system, which is still reliable, and it's because it's digital. It's not. You don't have like one paper community currency competing with another paper community currency. I saw that Varoufakis, the finance minister for Greece, had recommended one possibility for getting out or helping them get out of their troubles would be to have a Bitcoin-like algorithm used to create a local currency that would be, a local Greek currency issued by the government or by the government's state-owned banks that would be an advance against future taxes. So it would be acceptable in the payment of taxes, and that would give it its viability. But in order to make the whole thing secure, you would follow the Bitcoin model.
Well, that's an interesting idea. I think that we're coming down to the end of our road here, vis-a-vis our time. But we've had a wonderful time talking to you, and we hope that you'll come back sometime, Ellen Hodgson-Brown. And would you like to say the names of some of your other books? Because I know that you've written on health issues, natural health preservation, and that looked very interesting. And I'm going to personally look into that more deeply.
Okay, thank you. And it's been great talking to you, too. I've written 12 books, actually. My 12th is called The Public Bank Solution. So that was a sequel to Web of Debt, on how we could set up our own state-owned banks, city-owned banks, et cetera, and I looked globally and historically at other public banking models, of which there are many. And then my first 10 books were on health, alternative health care. I had one that I co-authored with Dr. Lynn Walker that was a bestseller called Nature's Pharmacy.
I've heard that.
I did one called Forbidden Medicine. It was actually a lawsuit I worked on, but it was an alternative cancer healer who wound up spending 4 years in jail for the alleged fraud of saying he had a high rate of success with cancer, which he actually did. So quite tragic story, really. But
was
I wrote
Brzezinski in
Brzezinski. No, that was Jimmy Keller. But the attorney Rick Jaffe, who was the attorney for Brzezinski, also was an attorney on Jimmy Keller's case for part of it.
Wow, you're a fascinating person, and It's been a fascinating conversation and an important one. I mean,
yes, absolutely.
We can speculate about the paranormal, but as I said before, this shifts your paradigms more than anything. All those little pieces of paper in your wallet aren't worth diddly unless you get your act together and start to act. And I guess this would be the time to do it because it's getting real close.
Yes, I agree. And I'd vote for you. If you ran somewhere where I could vote for you, I'm a Green, and I would definitely vote for you.
Well, I'm not a Green, but I'd vote for her, too.
Become a Green.
Well, maybe I will.
Okay.
Ellen, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure, really.
Yes,
thank you.
Absolutely.
And
thank you.
Best of luck in your endeavors. And you're a brave woman.
Yes. Bye now.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Here we are at Shattered Reality.
Yeah, well, my reality was shattered. How about yours?
I thought she was wonderful, Kate.
She's
Thank
a
you
paradigm
for
shifter.
She was wonderful. She was a great guest.
Fascinating person, too.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Very wide.
Renaissance woman.
Of interests and so forth. Please like us on Facebook, like us on our blog spots, and like us on iTunes. We are looking for your comments, and we would be happy to look at your guest suggestions as well. And as a thought, and this is just a very wild supposition, I wanted to end with a couple of thoughts about the crash of the Amtrak train, the very unfortunate crash of the Amtrak train, which I did start to mention with Ellen there, and how it showed that we need to keep up our infrastructure, because you get on a train and you expect to get where you're going. You don't expect one of these horrible things to occur. And it reminds me of something to do with the 1980s, late 1980s and 1990s, when people on the Amtrak trains that went from Philadelphia to Wilmington and onward towards Baltimore and Washington, there were a lot of people who were on that train, and they would report hearing voices in their heads during the time that they were on the train. And these were people who did not have a history of psychiatric conditions. They lived ordinary lives, and when they weren't on the train, they were not hearing the voices. Okay? And it was reported in the New York Times at one point, like an article about people hearing voices and how could you possibly project a voice inside someone's head. And as it turns out, it seems you can do such a thing.
Yeah, they just,
And, it harks back to days of MK Ultra and so forth. And in fact, a friend of mine who lives in Wilmington, Delaware, had a son that was traveling along that route going up to Philly and back to Wilmington. And he had some very strange experiences of that sort. And, he was in his 20s. He wasn't a psychiatric patient. And so, I had some actual confirmation on that story. So I wonder if something like that could have happened to the head of that train, the engineer of that train. I'm not saying it was. It's just something that went through my evil little mind.
Yeah. That's the one Joe Biden travels on, right?
Joe Biden traveled the part of it from Wilmington down to Washington for years, right?
Maybe the voices were in his head too, huh?
Well, maybe so. I don't know. In any case, a lot of the lawmakers travel down the Amtrak route.
That's true,
actually. A lot of them do. A lot of them.
That's interesting. That is true. That is true. And if you could influence
Biden
lawmakers,
is far from the only one.
Yeah.
But people in the Philly to Washington stretch would complain about hearing voices in their heads. And I realized that this stretch where the train went out of control is about 15 miles north of the stretch that began, but still it seems very coincidental. One thing may have absolutely nothing to do with the other, but it's worth thinking about.
Yeah. Okay, well, if anybody out there has any clues or any thoughts, post them on our website by all means, which is, Fahrusha, the website again is
shatteredrealitypodcast.com. And and if you go to iTunes, you will find us, Shattered Reality Podcast. And on Facebook, you put in Shattered Reality, and it's the one which is listed as a radio station.
Okay.
But this is free, commercial-free broadcasting.
That's right. No, only greenbacks here. No Federal Reserve notes here.
No credit cards.
No credit cards. No Bitcoins either. Sorry. Okay, see you next time.
Okay, take care.
Welcome to Shattered Reality with your hosts Kate Valentine and Fahrusha. Prepare to have your paradigms shifted and your truths questioned. And now, Shattered Reality.